Welcome, Shadow viewers. I'm pleased to present you with Chapter 3 of Cry for Me. We've heard about the last war. We heard about the division of reality. And now it is time to hear about the separated siblings. And that is the chapter title for this third installment. Chapter 3, Separated Siblings. Hope you're comfortable. Do you have that blanket still? Is your window still cracked, letting that inch of breeze in? How about that candle, still burning bright? Let's hope so. Please enjoy Cry for Me, Chapter 3, Separated Siblings. The month had passed rather quickly for Kolya and Ashley. They were excited for their birthday, more so for the next part of their story than for their actual birthday. They had spent much time discussing what they had been told with each other, speculating on many things both wondrous and frightening. They talked about how awful the last war was. It was something they knew had existed, but had only heard about it being discussed in adults' conversations in the next room over. But when they had asked about it, they were told that it is for the eldest to tell the youngest about that part of history. The terror of living each day knowing that it could be the one where they had died, or the thought of being forced to kill another person because they believed differently from you sent ice through their veins. The very idea of such mentalities alone were foreign and terrifying. They both agreed that were they to find themselves back during that time, on that earth, then they would go to Anerlin, even if they had to swim the whole way there. They even played out rowing a raft and dodging those that wanted to stop them from succeeding. Epic survivals played out in mimicked actions, generated by the minds and imaginations of innocent child siblings learning about the horrors of history. They talked about the division of reality and how terrible it must have been. To feel so helpless to stop what was happening around you because, they reasoned, how could you feel anything but helplessness? They held each other tight and cried, thinking about being helpless and powerless during the division of reality, and promised each other to never abandon the other, no matter what. They had always been there for each other, and learning about this part of their history brought feelings of loneliness and fear they'd never comprehended before. They fantasized about how beautiful the skies must have been to be full of liquid auroras, and even speculated about just how many different Earths had, for just a moment, filled the skies. They tried to imagine a world that didn't glow, and a sky devoid of other galaxies. They had learned about the sky had looked like a long ago, with only stars in it, and the thought of a night sky filled with only small specks of light that could be easily drowned out by city lights made them feel lonely and sad, to say the least. The world they were born into was one of lights and vibrant colors and peace. The morning of their birthday, they woke before their parents and spoke almost entirely about what they thought had happened to the demon and the half-demon woman. They were also racking their brains over just who the mysterious woman might be, and how her brother brought her back from old Earth. They also were very curious about how they'd gotten separated. The one thing they knew for sure is that travel between their Earth and old Earth was, as of yet, impossible. After breakfast, they went outside to wait for their grandparents. It was too bright to see the glowing from the plants during the day, but their naturally rich colors made up for it. Even during the daytime, however, you could still see the closest galaxies in the deep blue sky above. They laid down in the grass next to the transport platform and waited in silence. The pixie came up out of the bushes near the platform and landed on Ashley's forehead. It bent over and tapped the orb on her nose before Ashley and the pixie both giggled. It flitted up immediately and over to Kolya, where it tapped on his nose too. Kolya smiled at it and scratched at his nose. The pixie, apparently, found this funny as it burst into laughter. Like the plants, it was too bright for the pixie's natural glow to be seen, but that allowed its features to be visible. The little creature was varying shades of green, with skin that had very pale greens, with dark green stripes and spots that varied. It had dark green hair starting from a sharp widow's peak near its eyes that ran all the way back and down between its wings and down its back. It only had 4 fingers and toes, and tiny claws that were so dark green they were almost black. It had a slightly feminine figure and a disproportionately sized head that was as wide as its shoulders. Its ears, which started by its lower jaw, were long and slender and stretched up and around to the back of its head, where the pointed tips of its ears nearly touched. Its facial features were very sharp, with almost jagged-looking cheekbone and eyebrow ridges, and a pointy chin. Its nose and mouth were small, and it had little fangs that stuck out of its mouth. Its eyes, however, were huge and almond-shaped. They looked like emeralds with tiny black pupils. "Hello, little one," Kolya said. The pixie let out 2 short squeaks as it hovered above them. "How are you today?" Ashley asked it. The pixie squealed as it flew in circles a few times before coming to a stop above them and smiled down at them. "We're excited too," Ashley said. The pixie landed on the ground between them and spoke out several indiscernible words with its squeaking voice. "Yeah, we're out here waiting for them to get here." "It shouldn't be too long now," Kolya said. He actually wasn't sure what the pixie had said, but he had a feeling it had to do with their grandparents coming, especially their grandfather. The pixie flopped down onto the ground between Kolya's and Ashley's heads and rolled back and forth several times until it had pushed the grass down. It came to a rest in its little grassy divot and let out a big yawn. After a long stretch, accompanied by a soft, drawn-out squeak, it wrapped itself around the orb and made a couple of little popping sounds. The blades of grass it had pushed over leaned over on their own and laid across it like a blanket, and it was soon fast asleep. Kolya and Ashley turned over onto their sides so that they were both facing the pixie, and in a few short minutes they too were fast asleep. Kolya and Ashley opened their eyes to see Daniel standing over them and smiling. They both began to speak, being obviously excited to see their grandfather, but he quickly shushed them and then pointed at the pixie, which was still sleeping. He gestured for them not to move before carefully getting down on his knees and removing his backpack. Daniel dug around inside for a second before pulling out a tiny silver package with an equally tiny green ribbon tied around it. With the gift in one hand held close by it, he gently nudged the pixie, which let out a little hiss and rolled over. "Hey, my little friend, wake up," Daniel said, barely above a whisper. He nudged it again. This time the pixie opened its eyes. The grass moved back into its spread-out position as the pixie sat up, yawned, and stretched, the orb resting against its side. Daniel held his gift out to it, and after the pixie rubbed its eyes and looked around sleepily, the shine of the silver wrapping caught its attention. It blinked a few times at the gift and followed up the hand holding it to the arm, and then saw Daniel's smiling face. A giant smile formed on its tiny face, and it said something none of them could understand. It reached out and took the small gift and carefully unwrapped it. It draped the green ribbon around its neck like a loose-fitting scarf and folded down the silvery foil wrapping to reveal a minuscule cake. The pixie's face lit up and it squealed with delight, holding its hands clasped together in front of its face. "Since we don't know when your birthday is, and you watch over my grandchildren, I figured only right to celebrate your birthday with theirs," Daniel said, and then looked at Kolya and Ashley. "That is, if you two don't mind." Kolya and Ashley exchanged looks with each other as the pixie looked up at them, clearly worried that they might not be happy about sharing their birthday. "Why would we mind?" Ashley stated for the both of them. "Besides, Dibs is our friend," Kolya said. Ashley smacked his shoulder. He fumbled for words and then looked alarmed. "I'm sorry. We've been calling you Dibs," he said to the pixie. We meant no offense. It's just that we don't know what your name is, or even if you have a name." "Is it okay if we call you Dibs?" Ashley asked the pixie. "We understand if you don't like it as a name." The pixie carefully placed its cake next to the orb and stood up. It suddenly lifted off the ground and flew over to Kolya and grabbed his hand. It made him hold his hand out with his finger outstretched. The pixie then did the same to Ashley. It then returned to the cake and tore off a chunk of the cake with each hand. It placed one chunk on the tip of Kolya's finger and the other on Ashley's, before returning to the spot it had been between them. It took a few deep breaths and suddenly yelled very slowly for a pixie. "I'm Dibs." This clearly took some effort, since pixies speak amazingly fast. After catching its breath, it grabbed another chunk of cake and offered it to Daniel, who took it without hesitation, and then it sat down next to the remainder of its cake and ate it with a smile while looking up at everyone. The three non-pixies ate their crumbs, as it were, of cake and smiled. Dibs wrapped the rest of its cake up, and then flew up and sat on Daniel's shoulder, carrying both the cake and the orb with it. Daniel got back up to his feet, being careful not to move too quickly, and told Kolya and Ashley to follow him. They all walked to the porch where they met up with Liara, who had been patiently waiting for them. They all stood in front of her, since she was blocking the front door, and waited. None of them spoke, finding themselves all lost for words in her somewhat stern presence. Without saying a word, she was able to express her concern over Daniel attempting to take Dibs inside with them. Daniel, when he finally did attempt to speak, only managed to make some awkward sounds rather than actual words. But she understood what he was thinking. She rolled her eyes and opened the door to go inside. "You know what they're going to say," Liara said as Daniel walked in front of her. "Well, it's for the children, you see," Daniel said, struggling a bit for an explanation. "They're friends with the little thing, and it would mean so—" "Save it, Daniel," Liara interrupted. "I'm not the one you have to convince. You know how people from their generation are." Daniel remained silent as Kolya and Ashley moved past their grandparents and headed to the living room. Even Dibbs held a finger up over its lips as a gesture of secrecy. As if by some unseen signal, Dibbs walked down Daniel's shoulder to his chest, as if gravity didn't really exist outside of suggestion. It lifted up the fabric of his coat and ducked down inside, maneuvering to the breast pocket of his shirt. Liara gave a tired smile and shoved the old man in front of her inside so she could close the door. Hours later, after a normal-sized birthday cake and the opening of several gifts, Kolya and Ashley's excitement could be contained no more, and they begged and pleaded to hear the next part of the story. Since it was their birthday, they'd been dismissed from many cleaning responsibilities, but they still prepped and offered plates for the domovoi and domovika before joining Daniel in the living room, offering the domovoi and domovika pieces of their birthday cake as an extra thank you. The evening had brought a slight chill to it as the sun had set, but rather than turning on the climate control, they opted for a fire. Daniel, who felt it would help the mood, chose to use a mixture of different woods, since almost every kind of wood burned in varying shades and colors. Oak, which burned a deep orange with flickers of yellow, willow, which burned green, and lastly ash, which would burn purple, but with the sap creating blues that would streak up the flames and glow brightly. He turned off the lights so that the glow of the flames would illuminate the room. The fire presented a glow in the room much like the auroras. As the kids ran in, Daniel had just packed his pipe and was lighting it as they sat down. Clouds of purplish magenta filled the room, floating calmly above their heads. Dibbs, who'd fallen asleep, woke up at the inviting smell of the smoke and crawled out of Daniel's pocket. The room was dark enough that Dibbs's glow was quite noticeable and pleasantly mixed with the colors from the fireplace. It flew up and around the room happily as it inhaled. With what seemed to be endlessly deep lungs, Dibbs inhaled the entire cloud with a single inhale. "Well, I didn't expect to see that coming," Daniel said, just as surprised as the children. Dibbs slowly floated down like an autumn leaf onto the coffee table, coming to a rest next to Daniel's steaming coffee cup. Dibbs sat back on its hands with its legs outstretched as its head wobbled back and forth. It had a very satisfied smile plastered across its face, and suddenly its eyes got huge. It made one short squeak and then flopped onto its back, alarming Daniel and the children. But before anyone could do anything, Dibbs sneezed. A massive glowing green spray covered most of the coffee table, startling everyone. It gave a long exhale, expelling the cloud back into the air of the room. "Didn't expect that either," Daniel said. Dibbs flew back over to Daniel's pocket and pulled out his handkerchief before returning to its spot on the table next to the steaming cup of coffee. Daniel, without picking up the cup, set it to clean itself. The coffee inside drained. The cup began to glow red for a couple seconds, after which it refilled with fresh, hot coffee. Dibbs wrapped itself in Daniel's handkerchief and curled up next to the warm cup. "I'm glad I just cleaned that," Daniel said about the handkerchief. If it's quite all right with you, little one, my little friend, I would like to tell the children more of the story." Dibbs lifted a single arm up, made two squeaky pops, and gave a thumbs up. Rather than picking up where I left off last time, I feel it's best to tell you the story about the twins' birth, Daniel said as he leaned back in his chair. "Are you comfortable?" he asked. Kolya and Ashley both nodded eagerly. Now, as you know, the geography of our Earth is different to that of both Old Earth and Old World. The city we call Shiden was once two separate cities that had originally been on vastly different places on the planet. One city was Chicago, and the other was London. It is said that when the weapon was deployed against Ireland, and the division of reality took place, a crack cut right through a hospital in London. This is where the twins were being born. When the cracks formed, it ripped the hospital in half. One of the survivors was a doctor at the hospital, and she said that a crack cut through the delivery room and right under the mother of the twins. The mother was consumed by the light. The doctor, whose name has sadly been lost in history, said the mother screamed as her body seemed to disintegrate from around the unborn babies. It's on record that anyone who was in the light of the cracks would burn. It would look like when a paper was burning, but without actual flames, and it would glow a bright neon green. Most often, the memory of these people would fade with them, as though they were being written out of reality. Only those that faded with the pulses could be remembered. People could remember the feeling of watching someone disappear in front of them, knowing that they knew who they were, but then not. The doctor claimed that after the mother had completely burned away, the two infants laid on the delivery bed crying as they also began to burn. She said that thin cracks of bright glowing green grew slowly over their tiny bodies. In an effort of desperation, the doctor and one of the nurses both lunged at the bed as the whole building shook violently. The doctor managed to grab the boy and pull him from the light just before the floor began to cave in. The nurse had been able to grab the girl, but he and the baby fell through the floor. The doctor watched them through a hole in the floor as the pulses swept over them, and they faded away. The hospital shook and vibrated harder and harder as its location moved. It was all she could do to keep from falling as she cradled the crying infant and pressed herself against the wall. Debris falling on her, she protected the boy with her body. After all was said and done, the doctor found herself staring at the headlights of a car. The other half of the hospital was over a mile away, and the half she was in now had the lower 5 floors underground. The floor of the room she was in had combined with a street in downtown Chicago. She looked down at the boy in her arms to find he was safe. He had burn marks where the light had been, and even though the burns still glowed, they didn't produce any heat, and they weren't spreading. She ran, soaking wet from the division, from that room to try to find supplies and help, but the hallway outside the room was half sidewalk. She was dizzy from a concussion, but was fighting against losing consciousness. There was an empty hospital bed next to the sidewalk that had somehow been virtually undisturbed by the chaos. She explained that the bed was not only free from all debris, but it was also completely dry, and even had pillows and a folded blanket on it. She placed the boy on it and wrapped him with the blanket to keep him warm. The doctor said that She collapsed at this point and passed out as glowing flowers grew up from the ground or at the hospital bed. She said that when she woke up, the bed was covered in vines and that the boy was gone. Well, children, Daniel said as he got to his feet. Wait, you're not stopping there, are you, Grandpa? Ashley asked. No, we've still got more time before the last transport, Daniel said. So why are you stopping? Kolya asked. I need to use the bathroom, Daniel explained. Actually, so do I, said Kolya. Me too, said Ashley. I think I'd like some more cake as well, Daniel said as he gestured for the children to go ahead of him. They played a quick 2 out of 3 game of rock, paper, scissors to see who got to use the bathroom first. Ashley won. Daniel and Kolya played, with Daniel winning the second round. As they waited for Ashley to finish, Kolya tapped Daniel on the shoulder. You know the rules. No do-overs, Daniel said. It's not that, Kolya said. Well then, what is it? Inquired Daniel. Did the doctor find out what happened? Kolya asked. I can't tell you that. We gotta wait for your sister. But even then, we gotta have cake first, said Daniel. And this ends Chapter 3 of Cry for Me. So tell me, what do you think so far? I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this story. Please leave a comment or send me an email. The email can be found in the description for this video as well as the About section of this channel. I hope you have a good night. Sleep well. And dream of beautiful things. Because the world's full of them. Even the things that lie in shadow are beautiful. Good night.